Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Leaders Show, where each week we discuss key issues and news at the intersection of business, technology, and the humanities in hopes of making you a better digital leader. We're live each Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific on YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. The audio recording is available on major podcast platforms as well. This week, we're discussing legal implications of AI and digital transformation on privacy and IP. Plus other headlines for digital leaders from the world of enterprise transformation. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up the Institute for RPA and AI, as well as the Digital Enterprise Institute. We are a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network, providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. You can check us out at irpaai.com and deinetwork.com as well. My co-host is Carlos Alvarenga. He's an author, a researcher, an educator at the University of Maryland, Georgetown, and a former advisor from EY and Accenture. Good afternoon, my friend.
Good afternoon, Dan. Great to be back.
What's happening?
Well, there's always lots to talk about, right? I think we'll start with, my favorite company to follow, which is Tesla, which, a few days ago announced that it's dropping the price of its cars in China and the US another 10%, which means that since the year started, the Tesla range, I think, has dropped 25%. And my prediction that eventually, if you wait long enough, they'll be free. And so, meanwhile, other brands like Porsche raised prices this year. So it looks like Mr. Musk is going for volume, right? And if I were a Tesla owner and I bought a car in January, I would be pretty upset that they've lost a quarter of their sticker price in the year. That's one thing catching. I'm watching the markets today, which is a pretty grim day, as was yesterday. Right, the fears of a China recession and this real estate, wobbly real estate markets in China are getting the market kind of spooked, and so it is a difficult. Although August is usually kind of a tricky month in the markets because people are kind of gone, volume is light, but still looks like the China fears have crossed the Pacific.
Yeah, I had a couple headlines, and I wasn't going to bring this one up, but you inevitably talked about your buddy Elon, and the shocker for me was not on Tesla as much as it was on X. There's this report out of the Washington Post that they're actually throttling traffic, slowing down essentially the response time on links that are clicked for certain organizations that he's not a fan of. That is a blazing report for a company that was supposedly centered around being all around free speech and not censorship. I mean, if this is true, I don't know. I've been a defender of Elon for a while. This might be the last nail in that coffin.
Well, it was supposed to be this digital town square, right? And it's like giving some people microphones and putting some other speakers 2 blocks away from the square. And so this goes against exactly what was supposed to be the whole goal here, that to make this a level playing field, right? To allow all voices to be heard and access equally. And if you're now deciding, well, okay, like you said, I'm going to throttle links to whatever it is, right? I saw the article. I won't get into the sites that are being held back, but it certainly goes against what's supposed to be the ethos that he was trying to bring to the platform, which is to make it equally viable for all points of view.
So that's that. And, stock market prices aside, it seems like the tech industry is actually kind of bouncing back. There was a report in TechCrunch that, although unemployment is at a pretty low 3.6%, the unemployment rate within the tech industry is under 2%. So, for all those that are concerned about the AI jobs thing, haven't seen that effect yet, at least.
No, there was an interesting article a couple of days ago. I don't know if it was Wired or maybe it was the Journal about they had located. It was the $900,000 a year AI job, right? The AI talent war is in full effect, and so anyone I think who's in that space, at least in the next few years, has got a pretty resilient market. And of course, that means like we talked before, right, Dan? That in tech, you're constantly having to reskill yourself, pretty much every 5 to 10 years or so, depending when you are. And this looks like the great next reskill event, right? That we've got in front of us.
Yeah, really interesting. So LinkedIn had a report that came out about exactly that. The AI skills, kind of what the industry is looking like. Any jobs related to AI, and they identified a handful of industries they felt were going to be most affected by all of this. Top of that list is software engineers, customer service reps, salespeople, cashiers, and teachers, right? So, yeah, we've talked a lot about tech. We've talked about, I think, customer service as it relates to AI. We had a subject matter expert around kind of sales and marketing AI a couple weeks ago, Evan, talking about that. We've talked a lot about education, so maybe no surprises there, but it's starting to at least show up on whatever LinkedIn, I guess LinkedIn scraping profiles and things like that. The biggest job boom has been within financial services, meaning financial services companies seeking out people looking for AI in their titles or profiles.
And no one seems to be immune. I watched Bloomberg in the mornings, and they were interviewing the CEO of a retail company today, and they were asking her about what about AI in retail. Right? And so that there, it seems like there's no, at least the markets are looking, asking every CEO, well, what are you doing about this? And so there seems to be no industry that's going to be immune. We're having, at least it's a question you have to have an answer for, right? And it's often the case, as it was when the web sort of first came out, right? What is your strategy? So I think it's one of those things that's little by little is affecting everybody sort of almost everywhere, right?
That and reports are that business travel is kind of rebounding, at least according to the Global Business Travel Association. So you had this kind of segment of or business travel kind of being down, but consumer travel kind of pent up demand, perhaps after the pandemic. So that was kind of big, and that's kind of gone down. And now they're reporting that the business travel is back up. So part of that is tech, amongst other industries.
Right. That's just a critical part of business, right there. I think we all learned in the pandemic that there are a lot of things that have to be done sort of face to face, person to person, and Zoom is never going to replace the old fashioned sales call, right? The time with the customer. So that was probably an inevitable change for it to come back. So we'll see where that goes as well. Mhm.
So what last thing, what's your, we haven't done this in a while, and I haven't had a chance to try to corner you in a bit, my buddy. We talked a little bit about Disney last week. What's going to happen with them? What's your prediction?
Oh boy, the latest one was that they're sort of hanging out the for sale sign, right? It's the rumors that are sort of floating around, which at least in part of the business it may have just gotten too big, right, to some extent. And I think that it wouldn't surprise me. Then again, right, that is the one of the great crown jewels of the global business, right? And I think the only one who would sort of pony up that kind of money would be Apple, but I don't know that Apple really needs the headache, frankly. They seem to be doing fine. Apple tends to kind of keep to itself, right? Does things its own way. So look at the changing landscape. I don't follow, I follow Disney pretty closely. I think part of it is depressed because of this whole political situation, right? And it goes beyond just Disney, but what happens to that? But there had to be a shakeout in the streaming wars right then. There were just too many offerings. And so I think we'll see a few players. And I think that's why Netflix is still doing well, because Netflix will consolidate itself as one of the two or three great players. But there are just too many brands, right, that are out there. Maybe there are like a dozen. So Disney seemed to have sort of bought some market share up front, but now it's not really there anymore, or it's sort of cutting back. So we'll see.
It's just amazing to me, these companies, and I was talking to somebody yesterday, one of our members, large, very large technology company who has spent the last 3 years buying companies and acquiring companies, and now in the process of splitting, rolling out, and divesting from so many of them. Rumor has it Disney is planning on spinning off some of its TV networks, keeping theme parks and the studios, and kind of Disney Plus. Maybe ESPN as well, but yeah, there was rumors around selling to Apple. They've pulled out of the Netflix, the Hulu thing a lot, and you see the power of a good platform. I mean, do you know what the number one show on Netflix was last week?
I don't.
Suits.
Okay.
It was like, I don't know, 12-year-old show, Meghan Markle. All of a sudden they get the rights to it. They put it out on Netflix, and all of a sudden it's like the top show in America. It's like, I don't know, like I said, 12 years old or something like that.
What surprised me is to see Saudi money go after ESPN, right? The Saudis have been on a shopping spree. I don't know if it's the latest deal, right, of transfer fee that was paid, and it seems like there's no price they won't pay to make themselves sort of the owner of global sports. And if you think about a global sports brand, maybe Sky, right? At least in the English speaking world, but there really isn't like a Disney of sports. That no matter where you are on the planet, ESPN could become that. And I wonder if there aren't some back channel conversations. They seem to be buying just about everything else, so why not buy ESPN and say let's take ESPN global, with some serious cash behind it. So it makes sense to keep the entertainment and the parks as the kind of the core Disney, of course, and maybe like I said, all the other stuff has kind of become distraction. And something like ESPN would fetch, I think, a really great price in the market, especially these days when sports valuations, no matter what it is, right? Pickleball league, whatever you name it, right? People are playing crazy numbers for athletes, for leagues, for teams. So maybe a good time to put ESPN on the block. Wouldn't surprise me at all.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so our main
All right.
topic today is the legal implications of all this AI and digital transformation that's going on around privacy and intellectual property. I want to welcome to the show Chetana Kaasam. She's the managing partner at Legal Corner LLP and a senior advisor to ERPA AI. Chetana, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dan and Carlos, for having me on your show this week.
No, it's our
I'm looking
pleasure.
forward.
Thank you. So give us a little bit about your background, Chetana, before we jump in, and maybe just your observations as to what's going on in the technology space right now.
My background is I'm the managing partner of Legal Corner LLP. Now, this is a boutique law firm. We mainly cater to startups and early stage companies and help them set up their operations in the US to expand their business operations, whether it's an acquisition or a fundraising round, or and help them with everything corporate in their business, from reviewing and drafting all types of business technology contracts, reviewing their, making sure these companies are compliant with the privacy laws of the GDPR or CCPA. India has recently put up a data protection bill, so it's going to be interesting watching what changes it's going to make to the companies' terms of use of privacy policies here. So I'm very excited to talk about participate in today's discussion to share my 2 cents about legal implications of AI in on the data privacy and intellectual property.
So, we could start with sort of the big question that Dan and I discussed often, which is this balance between innovation and regulation. What's your take on what is the current state of that debate? Within, not within the tech people, but say within the legal professionals.
Law is trying to catch up with the innovation. We have to, because there's so much happening in the innovation. Not just law, everybody is trying to catch up with this innovation, right? You know, take a simple example of, students now using chat gpt to do their assignments. Now you have to start training teachers and get our old fashioned teachers to first of all start using technology, and then also understand how kids are able to use ai. They're way ahead of everything. So we really have to catch up, and as we are seeing, we still don't have don't know how to regulate ai. I think European Union is just trying to regulate ai, and we're trying to understand what to do and how to go about it. And slowly law is catching up. Regulation is always behind innovation.
Next time, if you were tackling this problem, there's an interesting article this morning in Foreign Affairs by Ian Bremmer of Eurasia Group and Mustafa Suleiman, who's the CEO of an AI company, and they were arguing that it's the most complex regulatory discussion human beings have ever had, because it's not controlled by government, it's controlled by the private sector for the most part. It's international. You can't really define it and say this is industry X versus industry B. So what they were arguing for, there's going to have to be some, almost like a, I hate to use the term, but almost like a United Nations sort of equivalent that's going to have to be created to look at this issue, because there's no one, even region, right, that can really say this is how we're going to regulate this technology. There's never been anything like it, especially because it is dual use. It has both military implications, civilian implications, in almost the exact same form. And so, what are your thoughts on various attempts to regulate this new technology?
Absolutely right. I mean, you have to have global regulation. Unfortunately, I don't know how far our global regulation are is effective in enforcing anything, given the politics with it. Uh, but given the challenges that AI poses, you have to have global regulation, and as well as good local. I mean, there should be guidelines provided globally, like how GDPR provides the framework for to the rest of the countries on how to formulate their laws. So that sort of guidelines would be useful, but implementation should be locally, of course.
And maybe one follow up on that: of all the things that somebody could be doing, what's the most important thing in your opinion? If you say, okay, the first thing I would be, if I could talk to all these regulators, if I had some way to influence that process, what's sort of this is the one thing that if I were a regulator, that I would be working on at this moment, the most pressing thing on your checklist right now.
The pressing thing for regulators.
For you, let's say if you were a regulator, you'd say, boy, is there? I'm just asking, is there one thing you say, whether it's privacy or whether the development or whether it's what they were talking about?
It's actually both privacy and intellectual property, right? It's because of uh, we are seeing that privacy is deemed to be a fundamental right in most countries now. But how is this privacy being protected now in light of the AI? You're using facial recognition features. The state is using them without taking anybody's consent. Streaming platforms, the social media platforms are using facial recognition. If you want to, you're using, if you want to take a photo for Mother's Day of your mom and you're going to Google Photos, and Google Photos is using facial recognition in getting this information. So how do you consent? Where are they taking everybody's consent in if not, how is this information being disseminated to its users? Who are they sharing this with? Are they really open about everything? Are they disclosing various uses that are being put to with our information? So all of this is still in a gray area.
So, yeah, the privacy one is interesting, Chetana. We've talked a lot about on this show, how many of the tech companies, I would venture to say most of the tech companies, at least the consumer facing ones, have opted for, let's do what we can kind of get away with and then deal with the legal ramifications later. We saw a story last week about Zoom having a blanket acceptance that they can use your data for AI training. Google's getting into more and more trouble around this, and maybe the tip of it was for me was we had someone on that was formerly part of Amazon Alexa privacy actually, and Amazon has this thing Sidewalk, which allows you to kind of create this network, allows them to kind of create this mesh network. And it was enabled by default on these devices. So, how do you, if you're a company and you're trying to figure out how do I get the innovation, but without kind of, sacrificing my customers' safety and privacy, what kind of things do you look for?
My advice is, before, if you're engaging with any vendor who's using AI, you must have good non-disclosure agreements in place to ensure that your information is not going to be disseminated beyond the point you allow it to. So have good NDAs in place. Make sure they have good privacy policies. Review them, and see where all your information is being passed on. These are the only checks we can have at this point.
Chetana, the, one of the things that strikes me about this world in which you live in is the famous EULA debate, right? You get this
Be me too. Go ahead.
100-line statement of what you're agreeing to, and I know most people, if anyone, right, doesn't read it, doesn't understand it. There's just this fantastic asymmetry of understanding between the person requesting permission and the one granting it. Do you see that companies are just sort of, I want to say, like sneaking in AI applications into these EULAs and hoping nobody notices? Is that kind of what happening next? In these upgrades or updates, I'm agreeing to a whole nother
Absolutely.
set of things.
Absolutely. Who's reading the entire terms of use, even though you're supposed to? They make you scroll through everything and tick the boxes, but are you really understanding what is being done? One fine day we'll get some forward on WhatsApp saying, oh, your information is being used for this, or this company is doing this, and suddenly you wake up and you decide, I don't want to use that platform anymore. The same thing happened with Zoom, right? None of us knew what Zoom was doing with our the conversations we were having with our clients, the confidential information that was happening on those calls. So yeah, it, it's we have honestly no way to tackle this monster.
Do we even get to the point where the courts would say, look, the asymmetry is so great that these things are null, right? It would be like a child signing a mortgage. And so I don't think a court would say that, yes, this 5-year-old right really bought this house. It's got to be, well, that's kind of how I feel. I feel like if I were a 5-year-old signing a mortgage, because I have no idea really, even if I sit down and read it, I probably would understand 25% of it. So wouldn't the courts at some point say this is kind of ridiculous what we've got going on, or no?
So
They don't.
you are not supposed to use legal jargon. The guidelines do say it should be in a language that everybody understands, but that's a very subjective thing. So how much does a layman understand the legal terminology? How much can something be simplified for someone to understand that? But to take that example that you'd used, when in the late 2010s, when the meltdown happened with the mortgage sector, it was a lot of innovation that happened in the industry that ultimately led to the meltdown, because no one the regulators didn't understand how to regulate it. And we are seeing similar innovation in technology with AI, and we are still trying to figure out how best to deal with it, how to tackle this. This is going to be our future, so we have to start understanding AI and its uses to be able to regulate it.
One of the things that's interesting to me, Chetana, is this whole issue around what constitutes intellectual property, and so I wanted to kind of get your definition, but also your advice, on this. It used to be it was a much more defined. When you entered into an agreement with a company, what was yours and what was theirs, right? Things it was just much more tangible than I think it is today. Now you have companies that let's take a bank, for example. They have financial data that is proprietary to them, but then they're contracting with an AI company that bases their technology on the ability to look at patterns across multiple clients, across multiple organizations using the platform. So where does that IP start and stop?
That's a gray area right now with the intellectual property on AI. Right now, AI is creating. People are. I don't know if you can say people are creating the portraits, but you're seeing AI portraits that are being auctioned off at a huge sum. Who owns copyrights to those? Music works are being created by AI. Who owns rights to that? Is it the user, or is it the person who made that AI software? Who owns rights to this kind of intellectual property? So it is a big dilemma to regulators right now. I don't have an answer to that yet.
Dan, even to the creators, right, there was a very interesting blog post by or an author who noted that people have started to upload in on Amazon books in her name that were created with AI. So they asked the AI, write a book like this person, right? Then they take it, it's submitted, and somebody looking through her profile would find this book that she didn't even know existed, and it's more than one. So she said, I have to spend my time now scrubbing Goodreads and other sites to eliminate titles that someone just created, concept, right, theoretically with the click of a mouse, and that don't belong, to me. They're not my work, right? And so you're right. This issue of when the machine reprocesses something, who owns that? As a writer, I find that it's a fascinating topic. I'm not saying that I know the answer is, but it's interesting to sort of think that one through.
Absolutely. And when the user is using such information that is generated by AI, it's possible that you're also violating somebody else's intellectual property because AI might be borrowing somebody's intellectual property. And, who knows, at some point they may have a claim over you saying you've used my IP. So those are additional risks with this.
It's an interesting opportunity too, Carlos, for technology companies, right? I think about, maybe the one example that popped into my head is, on YouTube, right? If you use a song that has a claim to it, when you go to upload that video, it actually figures it out and says, hey, there's a claim to this video, and then whether you have permission to use it or not permission to use it, or using it for commercial purposes or not commercial purposes. But that's one platform, right? Maybe there's an opportunity out there for some of these tech companies to build technology like that.
Well, I go back to, my new book came out, right? So it took me a year to write it, a year to publish it. So ChatGPT could swallow it in 2 seconds, and then now if somebody says, "Oh, tell me about persuasion," it gives them half my book. I get nothing from that, right? So that this is my thing. So where all the copyright system was invented to protect the work of creators, right, of artists and writers and intellectuals, because it takes a long time to do this, and then to say, well, then some machine will just swallow it and send it back with altered just enough to be unrecognizable, right? How is that fair to the person who spent all that time doing it? That it may be just impossible at this point to do anything about it. Uh, there was another interesting case this week about, there was a lawsuit that's been going on for a while against a digital library in California, because during the pandemic, they started lending out digital copies of books, and physical books and ebooks are very different. If you buy a physical book, you have the right to resell it, to burn it, to do whatever you want with it. But digital books are basically rented, and so the publishers won the case against the library and said, you can't arbitrarily start lending out ebooks as if they were physical books, because a digital version of a book lives very differently in the law than a physical one. And maybe we'll get to that as well, Rich. The digital art will wind up, like digital books, being treated very differently from a painting that I physically painted in a studio.
Right, right.
And what about corporations? And what about the things that how does somebody these days? I'm just curious. You're advising a startup that's saying, look, we have AI and we are creating new and novel things. What can you protect these days, or copyright or a patent or whatever the right terminology?
What can you protect? One, ensure that, yeah, as I said, have non disclosure agreements with whoever you're sharing your IP with. Ensure that they're robust NDAs that cover, that protect your IP. And make sure you have a good, you're compliant with the data privacy laws. Know who you're sharing your data with, know what data you're collecting. Make sure there is you take informed consent. um, yeah, those are the things we advise our startup.
I've read
Ensure.
in some places that some of the AI model creators don't even understand exactly how the models work. So if you're going and saying, are these models, again, sorry, it's an ignorant question maybe, are these models being patented the way you would have patented an invention or a process right a decade ago? Has the law caught up with how AI works and says, here's a patent for AI system X? Is that the way it's working these days?
Not fully yet, not
Okay.
there yet.
Okay.
As regulations trying to catch up with this.
So some of this AI technology is being created without, let's say, full legal protection. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing is, the time duration. I mean, Chaitana, you made this point before about, the law has to kind of catch up to it, but even just the legal process is a long one. If I'm a small business, and I have developed some IP, or some AI technology, and a big company wants to kind of rip it off, it'll take me years and a lot of money to be able to defend that. At some point, yeah, I may just lose. They'll just push it out in technicalities, throw a whole bunch of lawyer, right?
Yes. In the US, if you're going for a lawsuit, it is more than the time. The worry is about the money you're going to spend. You don't want to get into any kind of litigation at all. And in India, on the other hand, it's not about the money, it's about the time it takes. You'll just be buried in it for years together. And with who knows, maybe your grandchildren will get a resolution out of it. So, yeah.
Let me take a step back and maybe ask a philosophical question. You mentioned the issue of privacy, right? And I grew up thinking that privacy was an innate human need that we just, without having to be taught that, we we want privacy. But I've come to question that assumption, in my travels around the world, and especially in teaching. Um, I think there are people growing up in places like China where what we would have taken for granted as a privacy need there seems to be not so sort of intrinsic. So just what's your take as you look around the world? Do you see that perhaps a generation or two from now, people will grow up without the kind of innate privacy needs that we've always assumed in the West are kind of automatic?
You say it seems automatic in the West, but it's the West that is leading the way in giving up their privacy now, aren't they?
Oh, it's one of the ironies of living here. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, while I mean, it's very, you want to protect where you want to protect, but you want to disclose whatever else you want to disclose, right? So privacy is a fundamental, right? As you said, we all have the need to protect our privacy, as long as it's something that, that we really don't want to share with the world. But everything else that we want to share with the world, we're putting it out there, putting it on social media. What are we eating? What are we wearing? Where are we going? What are we reading? Everything is out there.
I'm thinking about this, the China social credit system. And if you grow up in a system where having a police officer say, "Hand me your phone and give me your and let me look through it," here in the U.S., right, people would freak out. "Oh, where's your warrant?" Whatever. I think there they wouldn't. They would just say, "Okay, here you go. The passcode is 1212," not because they have to, because it doesn't register for them. If you grow up in that system, there's anything wrong with that, right? The state has a right to look at everything that you've done. Where still we hold on to this idea. Maybe not. We don't hold on to it well, but we hold on to this fantasy, right? That there is some privacy there. With a country that big, are we now going to wind up with a third of the human population who doesn't think that having the state be able to see everything you do, score everything you do, track everything you do, if there's anything that's perfectly normal?
Using the same analogy to, say a company like Facebook that was collecting our information, how many of us thought it's okay? So what? What are they going to do with my information? What are they going to do with my photos that I'm putting out there? They're very harmless. So what if they, they are sharing that information with somebody? I'm not going to be influenced. I'm not stupid enough to be influenced by, for by a company to, influence me to how I'm going to vote or what my patterns are. How many of us really thought that? And that's the reality of it, right?
you're saying that in a way we're doing the same thing, right?
Exactly.
We're headed in the same, maybe in a different platform,
Exactly.
but you're right. The what there's a writer named Jaron Lanier who's written about tech is allowed to do things that any other institution would be held criminal for, right? But as long as a shiny object in Silicon Valley does it or asks you for something that it's presented as as innovation or as progress, and you're right. We've already sort of started that process of giving away so much at this point. Can't can't we even turn the tide back right then? That we've had many times.
Yeah, I just wish it was like as you know, I've been in sales and marketing my whole life. Like the whole basis of sales and marketing is that I've got to show you the benefits. I've got to sell you on the benefits of making a transaction, of buying something, of joining something. I wish that the tech companies had to do that instead of hiding behind these, to your point, these long end user license agreements that nobody reads, and then we're all kind of surprised that we got duped, or they gave them kind of blanket. We thought that we were opting into one thing, and then 3 years later they're using our data for something else. I think that's what kind of concerns me, and that's why as much as I've been anti-regulation in some areas, I do see the need for it now, because it's just there's nobody really kind of policing that. But I wanted to ask Chetana, Carlos, you mentioned before your book and your writing and your what is actually what do we actually own anymore, right? If what sort of data is inherently ours versus if we're using someone's internet service provider, theirs. If you're writing a book, maybe the actual text is your. I remember in college, there was some software that came out that could tell if you were plagiarizing, because it would compare your text to an old excerpt, but now it's not that. It's AI that's summarizing your text and creating its own version, right? Some of the sports companies say, any representation of this broadcast is a violation, right? And now you have this Hollywood stuff going on where there's this debate of, oh, well, does my likeness belong to me? Are there any precedents, Chaitana, in any of these areas?
The confidential information, as defined in every single agreement that we draft, right? It basically means anything that's your own that nobody else knows. If if say if the other party is able to obtain that information from another source outside of me or my related parties, then it's not confidential anymore. But anything that nobody else knows, that only I'm disclosing to you, that you would not be able to obtain it by yourself by looking online or anywhere else, that is confidential. So, going with that definition, to answer your question on what is mine, that is yours. That only if it's yours without obtaining it from anywhere else, then it's yours. But again, it is we've always found loopholes on in getting around copyright law. Um, you can't reproduce, you can't use the exact text, but if you interpret it in your own way, let's say similar stuff, that is permissible. You can't use somebody's story, but if you change the names and change the storyline a little bit, it's very similar. People can tell who it is about, but it is still not violating. So
So Chitana, take something like a social security number, right? That exists in multiple places. The U.S. government has it. The credit report companies have it. So is because it's available from a half dozen places, does that mean that it's not confidential information?
they're not supposed to disclose it. They have it. It is confidential.
Okay.
Stuff like your social security number, it is confidential. You can't. You can, if somebody discloses it, then that's breaching your confidentiality. They have it. They're meant to store it in a confidential way. Nobody else can source it other than it's like a contract between you and the government or you and the bank, saying you keep it safe, keep it. You do not share it with anybody else.
So one of the
So
things
it's
that
not
I've read
public domain.
proposed is the idea of a data bank, right? Where rather than giving my information to Equifax, it goes into this data bank and it's held only there. And so Equifax would access the data bank with my permission, but it couldn't keep the information. And so I always thought it was a very sort of intriguing idea that it's a repository where we know what is ours and people can only see it. It's like checking out a book from the library, right? You can open it and look inside, but you got to put it back when you leave the front door. So is there anything like that? Any movement at all within the kind of the legal world to say there's just has to be an alternative model to just having to give everybody everything, and then 15 companies have a copy of whatever I give them?
Sorry, I lost you there in the last bit.
Just to rephrase the question, there have been movements to centralize the storage of personal information rather than we have today, which is that every company has a copy. Is there any traction to that? Any real conversation about an alternative model to what we have today of just giving every company everything?
So whether it's GDPR or CCPA, they do protect your PI, right? That's the basic laws are already there. Your PI is sacrilegious, and you're not supposed to, no company that is collecting your PI should use it or should disseminate it without your consent. So that minimal that protection is already there.
Okay.
Now, if somebody is collecting all of your PI, you that not necessarily mean that you should be worried because it's saved in along with a lot of other information. If some person cannot obtain it legally, then even if they get access to it, that doesn't mean that it's not confidential anymore.
But I think to your point, Carlos, it's almost like it would be good to have a trusted third party custodian, and maybe like in the legal term, like an escrow for your for your information, right? Because and there are organizations that do it, but again, they have their biases because they're the tech companies, right? So I've got every password I own, in a Google or an Apple, keychain or wallet. And there is some interesting tech, as we've talked about on the show previously, Carlos, around digital wallets and digital twins and things like that. But to your point, maybe a central place that secures this, and you just give these places temporary access, like when you connect something to Google and say, hey, you can access this, but I can revoke it at any time.
Look, and we have a model, like we have two models. You just mentioned one. I didn't think about that. Google works that way, the single sign-on, but also credit reports, right? The Audi doesn't keep my credit history, right? It contacts these one of three bureaus, right? Not that they're that great to begin with, but okay, the model is there, and the bureau says yes, he's good to go. We'll give him the car. So we have that, but we also, even better, like you said, we have this Google system which says, I love the part that I can say, okay, you've got access now, and if I change my mind, I go on Google, not on your app, right, and then revoke access that way. So it seems to me, I get this question like, who can you trust and how would it work? But I would lean toward that model more than I have to go and give a whole block of data to every company I want to work with. It's kind of what we have today.
But then you have a security challenge, right? Which is
Right.
it's a marked target, right? At least when it's, I guess, decentralized in a way. If somebody gets one password, they get one password. If they get your custodian, they get it all. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the credit agencies either for the same reason. I mean, they literally created their own LifeLock system or whatever it is, and then it got hacked, right? So, can you trust
their error, right? Yeah. So they make a mistake, and then you have to pay to in case their system gets hacked. You're right. There's no perfect answer, maybe, but maybe there's something better than we have today.
Chetana, before we go, any final advice for companies that are in this space and looking for some help on the legal front? Any
Sorry,
final
I lost
advice?
you there. Do you have something?
Yeah, no, I was just asking any final words of wisdom or advice for any companies that are trying to get through all of this?
Make sure to have your privacy policy in place. Make sure to have a good non-disclosure agreement in place. make sure you know where your information is going or what information you're using, where is it coming from, get the source of it.
Good
Sounds
advice.
good.
Mhm.
Chetana, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Chetana. Appreciate it.
So Carlos, I don't know. First of all, Chetana was great, and if you have trouble with the IP of the book, I know a good lawyer for you. But
Hopefully, I will.
I the takeaway for me is maybe the answer is not legal. Maybe the answer is technology, right? Because you almost got to get ahead of this stuff. Litigating 3 years later, and if you don't have the budget of a Google, it sounds like a losing battle. No.
And I can see the arms race, right? Where you say, okay, Carlos, your book is out. So the next thing you do is you submit your book to an AI engine that reads the book and then constantly scans all the other AI engines for anything that looks suspiciously like my book. So I can send a cease and desist letter or start collecting royalties, which is in a way, I'm sure what they have for music, right? One of my time killers is watching music reaction videos on YouTube. And one of the channels I used to watch, they had a video a few months ago saying that the publisher of the Eagles catalog had complained to YouTube, and YouTube had told them since they have three strikes, their channel was being disconnected. Basically, they have over 3,000 videos they mentioned. Right, it looks like this is how they make that living. It's a husband and a wife. It looks like, and a child, and so they were saying, we get it, but three strikes and the entire catalog of I think 7 years of video creation was sort of gone. But you're right, it is the Eagles music, right? And it's a very interesting question. When I wrote the book, one of the things that I found fascinating was that I had in the original draft quoted music lyrics, and my publisher said, you can't do that. You even trying to clear lyrics from a song is a voyage into Dante's Inferno, right? Whatever circle of hell. And so forget it. We're not going to do that. So you're going to have to either take them out or paraphrase them. So I had to, exactly what Chetana was talking about, I had to paraphrase rap lyrics in the book and try to convey the essence of what the artist had written without in any way, shape, or form, right, getting a call from
the kicker is ChatGPT is going to end up summarizing your book, re-putting in those lyrics, and then selling music to the end user, or not paying you a dime in the process.
No, I'll get sued because the label think that I actually had the original version. Look, it's all interesting. Like I said, I think what happens is you're right. The next thing would be that the creative community, like with music, will have a service say, because this does exist, but there are companies that will scour, right, and the world and say someone's using your song without permission, and you can pay or stop. So maybe that's coming for everything that's out there, right?
No, yep.
Super interesting world, right, Dan? As always, never things to talk about.
Yeah, no, never, buddy, never. So check out Carlos's book. It's on Amazon, The Rules of Persuasion. It's just out. It's great. It's everybody needs to read it, especially if you're in marketing, communications, or any corporate job where you have to communicate with people. But really, it's for anybody. Chetana's organization is a senior advisor to IRPA AI and Digital Enterprise Institute. So Legal Corner LLP. Chetana, thanks for joining us. And as always, we offer free coaching sessions and state of the industry briefings on a variety of digital transformation and automation AI topics, as well as use case conversations. So go to network.irpaai.com to schedule that. In the meantime, I will see you same bat time, same bat channel next week, Carlos.
Great week, Dan. I'll see you next Wednesday.
Have a great week, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for watching.